so basically every child in the U.S. In 1861, President Lincoln announced that boys under 18 could only enlist with parental consent. Then, the following year, he prohibited any enlistment of those under 18. However, after many heavy casualties, recruiting officers ignored the announcements, and many children began to assist the military even though the majority of them were below the age limit. In fact, as many as 20% of Civil War soldiers were younger than 18. 18 was the minimum age limit in the Union, but the Confederacy held no minimum age. Children participated in the war in many ways. They enlisted themselves and became musicians. These jobs included fifers, buglers, and most commonly, drummers. The drummers would replay officers' commands, signal reveille, and participate in roll call, company drills, and taps. Other children served as scouts. They also worked as nurses for the wounded and assisted surgeons as they sawed off mangled body parts, often without anesthetic. Other jobs included messengers and often as fully fledged soldiers. They also participated by holding canteens, bandages, and stretchers. In battle, children would carry orders or assist with the wounded. A few even picked up a rifle and participated with the fighting. Even children who didn't enroll in the military experienced their own types of hardships. Families had to work in the absence of men who went off to war. Children helped run farms, plantations, and family businesses. They planted, harvested crops, chopped wood, butchered animals for food, and also drove horses, cooked, and cared for their siblings. Other children had to endure sitting by and watching as their homes were turned into hospitals for wounded soldiers. In the South, African American children went through many difficulties. Even before the war, enslaved children would escape to the north with their families, and even on their own. Once the war began, African Americans would slip behind Union lines for refuge. Then, once the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, the number of refugees rapidly increased. Emancipated slaves still had an extremely difficult life. Many barely had any shelter, their food was scarce, and disease was common. The slaves would be placed in primitive encampments, and many of them died of diseases such as malaria or typhoid. But their hardships of their freedom were still better than slavery. Northerners would sometimes set up schools to teach blacks to read and write. And like whites, many African American children joined the army and fought for the Union cause. They too experienced the horrors of war, including battles such as Fort Wagner. The children that enlisted had motives for doing so. Some Northerners were eager to rid the country of slavery. Also, some wanted to escape their lives at home on the farm or abusive family. Southerners had the desire to repel Northerners from their territory. The most famous child soldier was most likely Johnny Clem. Clem was only 10 years when he joined his regiment, the 22nd Michigan. He was given the position of a drummer boy. He became famous at the Battle of Chickamauga, where he picked up a gun and shot the Southern colonel off his horse. Then he made his way back to Union lines. Because of this, Clem was promoted to sergeant and became known as the drummer boy of Chickamauga. Another of Clem's stories was that his drum was destroyed at the Battle of Shiloh and was also given the nickname Johnny Shiloh. Afterwards, Clem went to fight and eventually was wounded twice. He lived to be commissioned by Ulysses S. Grant as second lieutenant in 1871. By the end of the war, children felt both joy and sadness. Almost every child had lost a relative in the war. Northerners celebrated in their victory, while Southerners sulked in defeat, and African Americans rejoiced in their freedom. The battle never seemed to end for them, however, as they continued facing hardships even after the war had ended.